In 1730, on a beach in the island of Runyon, a man was about to be hanged. He had been a pirate for over 2 decades. He had stolen more gold than most kings would ever see. He had sailed every ocean that mattered, raided ships that no sane man would have dared to touch, and built a legend so enormous that even the governments hunting him weren't entirely sure he was real. His name was Olivier Levasseur, and as the noose was placed around his neck, he did something that no one expected. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and threw it into the crowd. Then he shouted, and these are the words that historians have argued over for 300 years. He shouted, "Find my treasure, he who may understand it." The crowd scrambled. The paper was grabbed. Men pushed and shoved to get a look at it. What they found was a cryptogram, a coded message. 18 lines of symbols, numbers, and letters that didn't correspond to any language anyone in that crowd had ever seen. Levasseur was hanged moments later. He took the key to the code with him to his grave. And somewhere, on an island in the Indian Ocean, buried beneath coral and stone and 3 centuries of silence, the treasure is still there. We know this because nobody has ever found it. We know this because people are still looking. And we know this because the cryptogram, the actual piece of paper that Levasseur threw into that crowd, still exists. It has been studied by codebreakers, treasure hunters, historians, and governments. It has never been fully solved. This is the story of Olivier Levasseur, the man they called the Buzzard, the greatest pirate you have never heard of, and the treasure hunt that has lasted longer than most civilizations. To understand why what Levasseur did matters, you first have to understand who he was and what he had actually built over the course of his life. Because Olivier Levasseur was not a small-time criminal who got lucky once. He was not a mutineer who stumbled into piracy because he had nowhere else to go. He was not a man who was cornered into a life of crime by poverty or desperation. Olivier Levasseur was educated. He came from a middle-class French family. He was born around 1688 in Calais in northern France. He received a proper education. He could read, write, and, as the cryptogram would later prove, think in complex patterns that most men of his era couldn't begin to follow. He started his career at sea the legitimate way. He served as a privateer. A privateer in the early 1700s was essentially a pirate with paperwork, a sailor licensed by a government to attack the ships of enemy nations. It was dangerous, violent work, but it was legal. It was sanctioned. It was, by the standards of the era, respectable. Levasseur served under the French flag during the War of Spanish Succession. He was good at it. He was skilled at sea, skilled at strategy, and skilled at reading the movement of ships in ways that other men couldn't quite explain. Then the war ended, and this is where the story of Olivier Levasseur becomes the story of almost every pirate from the Golden Age. When the War of Spanish Succession ended in 1714, thousands of sailors and privateers found themselves suddenly unemployed. The governments that had licensed their violence no longer needed them. The ships that had been their home and their livelihood were being decommissioned. The skills they had spent years developing, navigation, combat, the reading of weather and tide, and the behavior of enemy ships, had no legal market anymore. Some of these men went home. They found quiet lives in coastal towns and tried to forget what they had seen. Others couldn't. Levasseur couldn't. By 1716, he had made his decision. He sailed to the Caribbean, linked up with other former privateers, and crossed the line that separated legal violence from illegal violence. He became a pirate. At first, he operated in the Caribbean alongside men who would later become legends of their own. He sailed with Benjamin Hornigold, the pirate who would eventually mentor Blackbeard. He knew Samuel Bellamy, the man history would later call the Prince of Pirates. He operated in the same waters at the same time as some of the most dangerous and celebrated criminals the ocean had ever produced. But Levasseur wasn't interested in becoming a supporting character in someone else's story. He had a different vision. He understood, in a way that most pirates of his era didn't, that the real money wasn't in the Caribbean. The Caribbean had treasure, yes, but the Caribbean also had the British Navy, the Spanish Navy, the French Navy, and dozens of colonial governments all actively trying to hunt pirates down. The Caribbean was becoming dangerous in a way that the Indian Ocean was not. The Indian Ocean was different. The Indian Ocean in the 1710s and 1720s was still, in large parts, ungoverned. The European powers had trading posts there, yes. The East India Companies moved enormous wealth through those waters, yes. But the naval presence was thin. The distances were enormous. A ship that disappeared in the Indian Ocean could disappear completely in a way that a ship in the Caribbean simply could not. Levasseur understood this. Around 1720, he made the move that would define the rest of his life. He sailed east. He established himself on the island of Madagascar, which by this point had become the unofficial capital of the pirate world. Pirates from across the Atlantic had gathered there, drawn by the same logic that Levasseur had followed. The Indian Ocean was rich, the waters were vast, and there was no Woodes Rogers waiting to offer amnesty and then hang you if you refused. And it was from Madagascar, from the scattered islands and hidden coves of the western Indian Ocean, that Levasseur built the legend that would eventually lead him to a beach in Réunion with a noose around his neck and a piece of paper in his hand. Here is where the story gets extraordinary. Because what Olivier Levasseur did in April of 1721 makes every other pirate raid in history look like a petty theft. To understand the scale of what happened, you need to understand what the Cabo de Hornos was. The Cabo de Hornos, later called the Nossa Senhora do Cabo in some accounts, was a Portuguese warship. But calling it simply a warship undersells what it actually was. It was a vessel carrying the personal treasures of the Viceroy of Goa. It was carrying gold, silver, diamonds, and precious stones that had been accumulated over years of colonial rule in India. It was carrying sacred religious objects, golden crosses, diamond-encrusted icons, chalices and ceremonial items of incalculable value. It was carrying the private wealth of one of the most powerful colonial officials in the Eastern world. It was also, at the moment Levasseur found it, in serious trouble. The Cabo de Hornos had been badly damaged by a storm. Its guns were compromised. Its crew was exhausted. It had limped into the harbor at the island of Réunion, then called Bourbon, seeking shelter and repairs. What it found instead was Olivier Levasseur. Levasseur was anchored nearby with two other pirate ships. His allies included John Taylor, another pirate of considerable reputation, and a French pirate named Labousse, a name that meant the Buzzard, which is the nickname historians would later attach to Levasseur himself. The raid on the Cabo de Hornos was not a battle in any meaningful sense of the word. The Portuguese ship was already crippled. Its guns couldn't fire effectively. Its crew had no realistic chance against three fully armed pirate vessels. The pirates boarded. The crew surrendered. And what Levasseur and his men found in the hold changed everything. Historians have debated the exact value of what was taken that day for 3 centuries. The estimates vary depending on the source and the methodology used to calculate historical values in modern terms. But the lowest estimates put the haul at the equivalent of what a working sailor would have needed 4,000 years to earn at the wages of the era. The higher estimates are significantly larger. What we know for certain is what was on board. The historical record is detailed. Gold and silver coins, an enormous quantity of them from multiple nations and mints. Diamonds. Not a handful, not a small collection. Enough diamonds that each member of the pirate crew received a share that would have made him wealthy for the rest of his life if he had been sensible about spending it. The Fiery Cross of Goa. This was a religious artifact, a large cross made of pure gold set with diamonds, rubies, and other precious stones. It had been created by the Catholic Church as a sacred object of enormous importance. Its monetary value was extraordinary. Its cultural and religious significance was beyond calculation. Additional sacred objects, golden candlesticks, ceremonial vessels, items that had been created by master craftsmen and blessed by high-ranking church officials. The personal jewels of the viceroy and the archbishop who were traveling aboard the ship. When the pirates finished loading what they had taken onto their own ships, they had completed what is, by most historical measures, the single largest pirate theft in recorded history. Henry Avery's raid on the Ganges Sawai, which you may remember from another Bilge-bound video, is often called the greatest pirate raid ever. And by some measures it was. But the raid on the Cabo de Hornos rivals it. Some historians argue it surpasses it. Levasseur's share of the haul, his cut as one of the leaders of the operation, was staggering. And this is where the treasure hunt begins. Because after the raid, after the division of the spoils, after the celebration and the chaos of men who had suddenly become wealthier than they had ever imagined they could be, Levasseur made a decision. He didn't spend it. Not all of it, not the largest and most valuable pieces. He hid it. The raid on the Cabo de Hornos in 1721 did something that the European powers could not ignore. Portugal was furious. The Viceroy of Goa had been humiliated. Sacred religious objects had been stolen. The Archbishop's personal property had been taken at gunpoint. The financial loss was enormous, but the symbolic damage was arguably worse. The most powerful colonial officials in the Indian Ocean had been robbed by pirates in a harbor where they had sought safety. The Portuguese demanded action. The British, the French, and the Dutch, all of whom had interests in the Indian Ocean, agreed that action was necessary. The hunt for Levasseur intensified, but the Indian Ocean was large. The pirate networks were well established. And Levasseur was smart. He changed his routes, he changed his bases. He moved between Madagascar and the scattered island chains of the Western Indian Ocean in ways that made him extraordinarily difficult to track. He had allies among the local populations on several islands, people who provided food, shelter, and information in exchange for gold. He had informants in ports who warned him when naval vessels were approaching. For nearly a decade after the raid on the Cabo de Hornos, Levasseur remained free. This is remarkable when you consider the resources that were being deployed against him. Naval vessels from multiple European nations were actively searching. Governors in port cities across the Indian Ocean had standing orders to capture or kill him. Rewards had been issued. Informants were being cultivated. And still, he survived. Part of this was skill. Levasseur was genuinely exceptional at what he did. His navigation, his seamanship, his ability to read situations and extract himself from danger, these were real abilities, not legend. Part of it was luck. There is always luck in survival. Ships that should have found him didn't. Informants who knew his location stayed silent longer than expected. Storms that should have destroyed him pushed him in directions that kept him safe. And part of it was the treasure. Because the treasure from the Cabo de Hornos gave Levasseur something that most pirates never had: genuine financial security. He didn't need to keep raiding to survive. He could lay low for months, even years, living off what he had accumulated, waiting for the pressure to ease before he moved again. This is why the treasure hunt matters beyond the romance of hidden gold and buried diamonds. The treasure is real because Levasseur had reason to hide it, means to hide it, and time to hide it carefully. He wasn't a man who buried something in a hurry while naval ships closed in. He had years. He had resources. He had the intelligence to plan a concealment that would survive his death. By the late 1720s, the net was closing. The pirate networks that had protected men like Levasseur for decades were being dismantled. Madagascar was no longer the safe haven it had once been. The European navies had learned from the lessons of the Caribbean. Permanent settlements of pirates needed to be destroyed, not just chased away. The French, in particular, were pressing hard. Levasseur had raided ships flying the Portuguese flag, but he had also, over the years of his career, raided ships with other allegiances. He was not, by any measure, a popular man among the colonial powers. By 1730, the choices had narrowed. Levasseur made the decision, or perhaps the decision was made for him, to accept a kind of semi-retirement on the island of Réunion. He was no longer actively raiding. He was living quietly, or as quietly as a man with his history could manage. The French authorities found him. He was arrested. He was tried. The verdict was never in any real doubt. The execution of Olivier Levasseur took place on July 7, 1730, on the island of Réunion. The accounts of what happened that day have been repeated and embellished over 3 centuries, so it is worth being careful about what is documented and what is legend. What is documented, Levasseur was publicly executed by hanging. He was convicted of piracy. His execution was intended as a public spectacle, a warning to others in the tradition of the era. What is documented and disputed, before his execution, Levasseur made a statement to the crowd and threw something into it, a piece of paper containing a coded message. The exact words he used have been reported differently across different historical sources. Some accounts have him saying, "Find my treasure, he who may understand it." Other accounts are slightly different in their phrasing. No single contemporary source gives us the exact words with absolute certainty. But the cryptogram is real. The paper that was thrown. The coded message. The 18 lines of symbols that no one has ever fully decoded. It exists, it has been studied, and 300 years later, it remains one of the most tantalizing, unsolved puzzles in the history of piracy. Let me describe what the cryptogram actually looks like, because most people who have heard of it have never seen it. It is a short document, 18 lines. It uses a combination of standard letters, numbers, and symbols that do not correspond to any simple substitution cipher. Early analysis assumed it was a straightforward coded message where each symbol represented a letter or word. That assumption turned out to be inadequate. The cryptogram appears to draw on multiple systems simultaneously. There are elements that suggest Masonic symbolism. There are elements that may reference astrological signs. There are what appear to be navigational notations mixed in with what appear to be linguistic codes. It is, in short, the work of an educated and deliberate mind. An uneducated pirate doesn't create something like this. A desperate man hiding treasure in a hurry doesn't create something like this. This was designed. This was constructed with intention. This was the work of someone who wanted the message to be solvable, but only by someone with the right knowledge. The question is, what knowledge? The treasure hunt for Levasseur's hoard has been going on in various forms for almost the entirety of the 3 centuries since his death. But it entered a new phase in the 20th century, and that phase is where the story becomes something that isn't just history, it's an active, ongoing mystery. In the 1930s, a man named Reginald Cruz Wilkins came into possession of a copy of the cryptogram. Cruz Wilkins was a former British guardsman who had settled on the Seychelles, a chain of islands in the Indian Ocean, northeast of Madagascar, northeast of Réunion. He spent the next 3 decades of his life trying to solve it. Cruz Wilkins concluded that the treasure was buried on Mahé, the largest island of the Seychelles. He believed the cryptogram contained references to the 12 labors of Hercules, that Levasseur, educated man that he was, had encoded the location of the treasure using Greek mythology as a key. He began excavating. He found things. Not the treasure itself, not the gold, not the diamonds, not the Fiery Cross of Goa. But he found things that suggested someone had been there before him. Carved rocks with markings that matched symbols in the cryptogram. A formation of stones that appeared deliberately placed. Underground passages that seemed too regular to be natural. The Seychelles government took notice. The excavations at Bel Ombre on Mahé became, over the decades, a kind of official-unofficial project. The government recognized that if the treasure existed and was found, it would be a discovery of world historical significance. Cruz Wilkins died in 1977 without finding the treasure, but he had found enough to convince many serious researchers that he was in the right place, if not quite on the right spot. His son, John Cruz Wilkins, continued the work. John spent years developing new theories about the cryptogram, new interpretations of the carved rocks and stone formations at Bel Hombre. He brought in experts. He used modern technology, ground-penetrating radar, sonar, geological surveys, and he found something. In the early 2000s, surveys at the site revealed what appeared to be a large underground chamber, not a natural formation, a chamber that suggested deliberate construction, a chamber of the size and type that could, theoretically, contain an enormous quantity of buried material. The chamber has not been excavated. The work has been delayed by a combination of factors: the complexity and cost of the excavation required, disputes over permissions, the sheer difficulty of the terrain. But the chamber is there. The question of what is inside it remains, as of today, unanswered. And this is what separates the treasure of Olivier Levasseur from most pirate treasure stories. Most pirate treasure stories are fiction. The buried treasure of popular imagination, maps marked with X, chests full of gold coins, hidden caves on tropical islands, is largely myth. Pirates generally spent their money. They didn't hoard it, they didn't bury it. The romance of buried pirate treasure is mostly a creation of literature, not history. Levasseur is different. Levasseur had reason to hide treasure. He had the treasure to hide. The cryptogram is real and documented. The Fiery Cross of Goa, the golden cross set with diamonds and rubies that was taken from the Cabo de Hornos, has never been found. It is not in any museum. It is not in any private collection. It did not surface in any historical record after 1721. It went somewhere. The question is where. In recent decades, multiple serious attempts have been made to decode the cryptogram fully. The most significant progress has been made by researchers who approached it not as a single cipher, but as a layered document. A message that operates on several levels simultaneously, where solving one layer reveals a key that unlocks the next. This approach has produced partial results. Some researchers believe they have identified sections of the cryptogram that correspond to navigational coordinates, latitude and longitude references encoded in the symbolic language that Levasseur used. These coordinates, if correctly interpreted, point to specific locations on or near the island of Mahé in the Seychelles, which is exactly where Cruz Wilkins spent his life looking. Other sections of the cryptogram appear to contain descriptive clues, references to physical landmarks, natural features, or constructed markers that would have been visible to someone who knew what to look for. The Hercules theory, that the cryptogram encodes the 12 labors as a sequence of clues to be followed in order, has never been definitively proven or disproven. It remains one of the most serious interpretive frameworks that researchers have applied. What has been established through the work of multiple independent researchers over multiple decades is this: the cryptogram is not random. It is not a hoax. It was created by someone with genuine intelligence and genuine education, and it contains information that was intended to be recoverable by the right person with the right knowledge. 300 years of the wrong people trying has not been enough to recover it. Maybe the right person hasn't tried yet. Here is what we know. Olivier Levasseur was real. His raid on the Cabo de Hornos was real. The treasure he took was real and of genuinely extraordinary value. The Fiery Cross of Goa has never been found. The cryptogram is real. It exists. It has been studied for 3 centuries. It has not been solved. The underground chamber at Bel Hombre in the Seychelles is real. It has been detected by modern survey equipment. It has not been opened. These are not legends. These are documented, verifiable facts. What we do not know is the answer to the question that Levasseur threw into that crowd in 1730, in the seconds before he died. Where is it? The Fiery Cross of Goa, made of pure gold, set with the most precious stones that the Catholic Church could commission, is somewhere. It does not dissolve. It does not decay. If it was buried, it is still there exactly as it was placed, waiting for someone to understand 18 lines of symbols and numbers that a pirate composed 300 years ago. Think about that for a moment. The largest golden religious artifact ever stolen from the Portuguese Empire is sitting in the ground somewhere on a tropical island in the Indian Ocean. It has been there for over 300 years. Governments have looked for it. Treasure hunters have devoted their lives to it. Modern technology has found a chamber that might contain it. And it is still there. Levasseur threw that paper because he wanted to be found. Or because he wanted the game to go on. Or because he was a man who had spent his life being smarter than everyone around him and couldn't resist one final demonstration of that fact. We don't know which. We don't know what he was thinking in those last moments on that beach, with the noose around his neck and the crowd scrambling for the paper that contained the only key to a fortune that had never been recovered. We don't know if he died satisfied knowing the treasure would never be found, or if he died hoping that someday someone would finally be clever enough to understand what he had written. 300 years later, the question is still open, the treasure is still there, and the cryptogram is still waiting.